Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
Our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello and welcome to the Functional Forum. We are back in person at the Institute for Functional Medicine's annual international conference. Over the next hour, we're going to introduce you to some of the best speakers as well as connect from practitioners all over the world that come to this annual convergence of functional medicine. Enjoy. Times there are changing, my friends. Here at the hotel where the conference is at, Rose and Shingle, they have a whole vegetable garden with all kinds of vegetables here. I think they use them in some of the restaurants on site. But also, we've done the event, the pre-party for the conference the last few years since 2015, and it's typically looked like getting people together and having some wine or otherwise. This year we decided to do something very different, which is that we had an awesome pickleball match. So we had pickleball during the day, and people came from all over the country and all over the world to play during the day, and in the evening we had some matches, some celebrity duels, and food and connecting together, and it was really, really amazing. I think next year we're going to make it bigger and better, so I hope you can join us. Pickleball is the fastest growing sport in America. It's much more social and exciting and interesting to play, and it was a really great time. Hope you can join us next time. All right, we are here with Dr. Datis Karazi, and I know many of you have learned from him over the years. Doc, just first of all, the Linus Pauling Award this year, Dr. Aristo Vajjani, I know a close collaborator of yours for many years. What was it like seeing him getting that?
He's been a mentor for me for a long time. He is one of the major influencers of how the immune system is impacted by functional medicine. The research he's published hundreds of papers that talk about molecular mimicry, cross-reactivity. It was such an amazing thing for so many people in the audience to see him finally get recognized for his work, because he's such a humble, brilliant guy. And people like that don't usually, sometimes get overlooked. Yeah. So it was so nice to see him, and he was there from the beginning of functional medicine, from the very first meeting to now. Yeah. And he's actually impacted the testing we do. He's impacted how we treat the microbiome. He's impacted autoimmunity. The entire field of functional medicine was really significantly impacted by his work.
One of the most impactful things for me, like in April 2020, we did a webinar together for PLMI, and he basically predicted what was about to happen with this very unpredictable pandemic that we had. It's sort of a testament to, if you can predict the future, you've got some pretty strong science behind you, right?
Yep. He right in the beginning of the pandemic, he published something in Clinical Immunology, a letter to the editor predicting everything that was going to happen. Yeah. It's published like the first 2 months. Vaccine passports, how this is going to play out. It's going to trigger autoimmunity. And then he published some great work showing all the different molecular mimicry reactions with SARS-CoV-2. And when the pandemic needed him, he came through. And when functional medicine needed him, he's always been there.
Yeah. So this weekend, obviously, like quite a range of topics. What was piqued your interest?
Well, with any conference, it's really the conversations in between that are so important. We tend to focus on the topics, and the topics are nice because you get to get exposure to stuff, but obviously any expert can't really translate their entire message in an hour and a half, so you get that exposure, eye opens up. But the best learning takes place in the breaks when you're with your friends, and you go, what do you do for this? And then they tell you. That's unbeatable. So when you get a chance to have so many experts all in one area, and then you get a chance to find them in the hallway and ask questions with them, that's what makes the conference so amazing. It's not just the content. The content's always, varied. Some people will like certain topics. Some people connect with certain speakers. But the core group of people that are here, it really what makes it so worthwhile.
All right. You heard it from the man himself. Next year you got to be here. Check out the next segment.
Aloha. I'm Dick Ranburanian from Hawaii. And yes, I live in a lovely place. But coming here, I'm impressed by the beauty of my tribe. When I first stepped in the room at my initial IFM conference, I knew I was home. And since then, everything has grown in such a positive way. But if I were to say one thing about practicing functional medicine, it is, number one, to listen to your patient's story with your whole heart and your whole being. Because if you truly listen to them, that in and of itself brings healing to them, because they're telling their story, which you then validate back to them. And that's the beginning of their journey.
All right, we are here with the Functional Medicine Pharmacist crew here. They were all here for pickleball on Wednesday night and are now participating, in the conference. So why don't we start just a little bit about what you've learned during the conference and what stood out to you?
My favorite lecture so far has been Deprescribing by Lara Zacharia. Obviously, we know pharmacists are super vital to the functional medicine care team, and she just nailed it with all the things that we can do.
A lot of interest in that group from doctors and other practitioners to get a pharmacist on the squad?
Yes, absolutely. We think every single pharmacy or every single functional medicine team needs a pharmacist on it.
Beautiful. Okay, what about you, Melody?
So I enjoyed the wearables discussion yesterday. So they talked a lot about the Aura Ring and other Fitbits and things that can give you information to enhance your practice. And one of the cool things is that, I think we've learned this through the pandemic and COVID, like they can actually find that your immune system is starting to fight this like days before you actually test positive, which is just really cool. So it actually happened to me in February. Like I saw my recovery scores crash, and then it was the next day. But I feel like we're so busy that sometimes we don't pay attention to it, and then it's oh crap, I just went to work and here I am positive for COVID. So, but yeah, so I feel like just the innovation and the technology getting better is just really cool to see how people are utilizing that in practice.
And Vanessa, I know pickleball was the highlight for you, but was there anything else that caught your attention as the most fun this weekend?
I did learn a little bit this morning about the use of phytocannabinoids in medicine, and I really liked the attitude of it is a medicine that happens to have some side effects that make it used for recreational purposes, but it is a medicinal compound, and I really enjoyed that presentation. I learned a lot. And also I learned about a new compound. Well, apparently there's a lot of new compounds, but one in particular was the CBG compound that really helps with depression and anxiety, so that was interesting.
Great to see you guys here coming to the conference representing the functional pharmacist world so well. We'll actually be back at the Functional Pharmacist Symposium later this year in Nashville in September, so come and hang out with these guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. So one of the keynotes at the conference was Dr. Michael Schneider, who runs one of the most influential labs at Stanford in the field of wearables. Now, looking around at practitioners, you see that wearables are now commonplace on the wrists and fingers of practitioners in the community. What's it going to take for this to be an actual part of medicine? We caught up with Dr. Michael Schneider. Check it out. All right, we are here at IFM Annual Conference with one of the keynote speakers, Dr. Michael Schneider from Stanford. Doc, I know you had a whole talk on wearables, and I know doctors are very excited about this, and so much so that I think many doctors now have an Aura Ring that they wear. What is sort of the net impact of a doctor getting excited about a wearable as opposed to a patient?
I think they can do a lot more. The power of wearables is they're measuring you all the time with pretty important physiological parameters like resting heart rate variability, skin temperature, galvanic stress response, even breathing rate, lots of different things that we think are all important for health tracking. And the fact that doctors are starting to appreciate it, that's huge because they tend to be a pretty conservative group. And so to be able to bring this in, and I think it's only going to augment the way they treat their patients.
What do you see sort of hitting the mainstream as new data points that we're capable of getting now that we weren't capable of getting before?
Yeah, well, the kinds of data that's new are things like this galvanic stress response. That's conductance on your skin. That's not typically measured in a doctor's office, but it does have some important physiology. For example, stress. When you're stressed, you sweat, your skin gets moist, and that increases the conductance, which you can pick up with a watch. It also shows up in other situations as well. So there are some things that you don't typically get in a regular physician's office that you can now collect. But I think the more important power is that you're collecting information over time and at a level that just hasn't been possible before. So when you pull someone's resting heart rate off first thing in the morning, it's incredibly accurate. It's a really good sign of someone's basically health state. They're either, if they're physically ill from a virus, their resting heart rate will jump up, and if they're stressed, it'll probably jump up too. So that's much, much more accurate than whatever you'll get in a doctor's office.
It's interesting. You know, from my perspective, and speaking to doctors, I've heard over the last few years, as this has become a thing, that wearables is like a blessing and a curse. Like, the blessing is a lot more clear picture of who this person is and what's going on in their lives. The curse being, because they're the doctor that spends more time with doctors, like with patients, the patient comes in with their wearable and saying, like, "Doc, tell me what to do with this information." And it's so much, and it's so rich. What is it going to take for technology to make it so that doctors can really use this insight and it doesn't take all day and we don't have to have hour-and-a-half appointments with patients?
Yeah, we need the proper, if you will, visualization platform, the proper mechanism for bringing back information back to the physician in a fashion they can use. Just, you hit the nail on the head. But one way to think about this is that a race car has 400 sensors on it, but it actually relays the information back to a pretty simple dashboard. And that's what we need for health. We want to have all these sensors on people, collecting information, as you point out, lots and lots of information, but you can't just put it all up there as raw numbers. It really has to come back in some meaningful fashion, sort of like a check engine light. Well, this thing is off. Maybe you better dig a little deeper. And so I think that's the kind of information, and you could even click on it in today's world. Unlike a dashboard, you'd probably, if you saw your check engine light, you'd probably want to click on it and see the 5 possibilities that exist. And so I think we can use this information to both the advantage of the physician as well as the patient.
Amazing. So I know you've commercialized a lot of information and research from your lab. Is there anything that you're commercializing now that does that?
Well, we're trying to improve the visualization platforms, that's for sure. So one of my smartwatch companies, Sensomics, does bring a lot of information back, and we're actually trying to make it in a more user-friendly fashion. So, for example, when you don't want to just read back raw numbers. You kind of want to know, gee, how is your health today? Are you stressed? And we can tell that. In fact, we have an early detection for COVID and actually respiratory viral infections. It's not specific for COVID. It does pick up other viral infections, picks up other kinds of stress. So that actually comes back as a simple red alert, means something's off. Yeah. And you can try and drill in deeper to figure out, oh, is that a respiratory viral infection? Or maybe it's actually mental stress. So you can dig in deeper. So we are bringing back, I guess, at the lab level, and then the company I'm involved with, and I know other companies are working on this too, to bring the information in a way that, again, has a readout that kind of means something both to the person and the physician. The other case is AFib, that we're not working on that, but other Apple Watches, for example, they're working on AFib detection, and people have figured out their AFib from their smartwatch. And to have this come back as sort of alerting systems, they're never going to be perfect. So you shouldn't treat them as that this is gospel, that it's not a gold standard test. It's an early indicator something's off that you might do follow-ups on. So I think we can bring the information back like that in very, very simple, useful fashions. We are working on that. I think the device companies are as well.
If you had a doctor and you're sitting opposite them and they said, look, I want to bring something into the practice that gives me some sort of like dynamic information, what would be your recommendation for sort of one thing that could add the most value with the least boring, annoying details to deal with?
Well, the easiest thing for them is probably information they already are familiar with, resting heart rate, but pull it back in a fashion where it's a simple graph, for example. I think you'd have to set up some of the interfaces are probably not quite there. You don't want to give somebody, 300 days of Fitbit data, but I think we could bring things in a more summary fashion that would be useful for them. So I think some of the things I just said, like some of the basic measurements, I'm probably backtracking a little bit here, on top of like stress alerts, the anomalies that have occurred over the last 30 days, that sort of thing would be powerful. And I think actually partnering with some of these companies would be useful, because I think the companies would love to see this get incorporated. There's still some things that have to get solved. Some of these devices, they still need to be FDA approved and such, which are not yet. So we're at this early stage where part of it's just showing that, you know, passing clearance and then showing they have utility will be very powerful for getting them incorporated into medicine.
Well, I am seeing the most innovative practices working on it and choosing something and doing it, and I think it's really, really exciting.
Well, our lab is actually doing some of this sort of at the researchy level, but we are working with some of the providers who are very interested in this.
I guess final question, you know, what is your experience of the functional medicine conference and the functional medicine community? Because this is like adjacent to you without being sort of exactly where you spend your time.
Well, believe it or not, it's pretty close. You're right. It's more one aspect of what we do, but we're very keen on nutrition. We do a lot with continuous glucose monitoring. And actually that's very tied into nutrition, which is a big theme of the conference. And so we're now doing a lot. We haven't published as much on mental health and stress that way, and that's also a big theme of the conference. So I think the conference is pretty fascinating. I'm a big believer food is medicine. It's not yet incorporated. It's kind of interesting how the U.S. is way behind, for example, Europe and China in thinking about the value of food and its importance in health. But I think there is a growing awareness, especially given the diabetes crisis is going on. 9% of people are diabetic, 33% of people are pre-diabetic, and those numbers are skyrocketing. They're not going down. So I think people are getting it that this is a real health concern, both for the individual as well as the entire nation. So we really do need to pay attention to it. And so I think the functional medicine conference is great because it does highlight a lot of this stuff. And I'm learning a lot here. There's a lot to learn because it's now becoming a big, as you point out, growing area as well. And there's some new technologies that we didn't quite cover that I wouldn't mind bringing in. I don't know if you want to insert them now or later, but for example, we're bringing in microsampling. Remote microsampling. What does that mean? It means you do little pricks of blood that you can collect on blood spots, mail in, and we'll give you a report back on 500 metabolites, okay? And we think that it's gonna open up a lot. It's gonna give you a much, much better spectrum of what's going on for your metabolic health, if you will, which impacts like everything, depression, diabetes, all this stuff. So I think this is going to help move medicine, not just the wearables, but also just the whole collection process outside the home, and I think it integrates nicely with this functional medicine community.
Well, let me ask you this, so at its potential, the microsampling, add the wearables, bring the data together, let's say 5 years down the road, what is the role of the doctor at that moment?
It's going to be to collect this data, pull it in, which will happen automatically. And it'll show up in a report even before they see the patient. They'll see these readouts that say, well, this person's mental stress seems to be high over the last 12 days. And it'll show up automatically with the sort of a red, green, and orange sort of thing, where green means they're probably fine, you can ignore those things. But you might take a look at some of these red things and other things and match that with the things you're already doing as you talk to the patient. So I think it's going to be a form of information brought in a very usable fashion. That's where I'd like to see it go.
I think that the ripple effects of you showing up and participating and keynoting at the conference will infiltrate our community, and I think the future of medicine lies within those pieces. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your great work, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been fun to be here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dawn Johnson. I'm from Parsley Health, and my 1-minute tip is so important that I hope all of you start today. It's called chewing. I know that sounds hilarious, but most people don't realize that the start of our gut is our mouth, and it starts with chewing. And most people chew about 5, 7, 10 times, but to really be able to get our digestive enzymes and be able to get our absorption of our nutrients and fuel our brain and our body, we need to chew. Also, chewing activates our vagus nerve. And breaking our nervous system down into two components, we can turn on the vagus and the parasympathetic nervous system by chewing, and therefore we're able to help our mood and anxiety get less and stress less and even improve our depression. And so that is my 1 minute tip.
All right, I'm here with Dr. Eric Lundquist. Now, one thing I didn't know about him until this conference is one hell of a pickleball player, and we had a great battle on Wednesday night. But Doc, even when I was first started talking about practice management, I think in 2011, you were a guy at that point that, had been on the cutting edge and had built a successful practice. Here we are 13 years later. What do you see?
I see some of the same problems that I saw when I first opened my practice. One of the biggest challenges, I remember when I came into functional medicine, I got so excited because I finally learned the why, right? It's like, oh, this is why people are sick, and this is what I can do to really help them. I remember being stuck in a conventional medicine practice and just feeling like I was limited in what I could do. But I also felt like, I'm not an expert enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough to be able to go out and start my own practice. And at some point, though, I just had to get over the fear. I had to get over the fear that maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe I wasn't smart enough, maybe I wasn't business-minded enough to be able to do that. And I think it's really important to start to share your dream with others. What helped me more than anything was being able to find people who would support me in my dream. And I think that's what I would love to see more from functional medicine providers, just reaching out, collaborating, and overcoming their fear so that they can get out there and start treating more patients.
It's a great tip for everyone. Listen to Dr. Lundquist. That's what this has always been about, getting out there and making it happen. Doc, thanks so much for your advice.
You're so welcome.
Cheers. So it was amazing to see Dr. Nalini Chilkov on the stage at this year's conference, and we caught up with her to hear a little bit more about how practitioners like you can help with the health plan of patients going through cancer. Really important stuff. Check it out. All right, we are joined by Dr. Nalini Chilkov, who has been a friend. I think we were just talking, 2011, I did my first event in LA, and you came to that. And it's amazing, 12 and a half years later, we're all still here doing new and interesting things, but essentially still doing a lot of the same thing that you've been doing for a long time. You obviously had a moment at this conference to bring your message of health-focused oncology, to this group. Now that you've done your talk and you've had feedback from people, how do you think it's gone?
I have been so well received. It's just been beautiful. And it feels like the marriage of the research, clinical-based, with a real humanized, heart-centered kind of practice. And it was just so beautifully received. It's been quite an honor, actually. Yeah.
So I'd love to just get your thoughts on, what it's been like to be a cancer-focused practitioner in the last 3 years, because obviously there's a number of factors that have, that impact, cancer outcomes, whether it be, loneliness or, some of these viral issues. And I'd just love to get your thoughts on what you've seen in the field in the last 3 years.
Well, cancer patients already become isolated. They become socially isolated because people don't understand what they're going through, or they don't have the energy to be in their community and active in relationships. But the last 3 years has also been more high risk for them because they're immunosuppressed while they're going through treatment. So I think the isolation was greater during this time period. And many cancer patients did not get the care that they needed. Operations, surgeries were delayed, chemotherapy was delayed, the ability to interact with their conventional oncology team was crippled, but the care that I rendered, that went forward, so there wasn't a gap there. So they still had a chance to have support for their decision making and support with a health model going forward in their treatment.
You know, I imagine that if oncology is sort of slow to adapt to these, fundamental truths of how to create health, I'm sure oncology was also slow to adapt to things like telemedicine and things that could have kept them going in the pandemic. Am I right?
Well,
on that?
I practiced in California, and really telemedicine was right there for my patients. And I have patients all over the country, and my experience, if you have a top doc, they figure out how to take care of you, even with the handicaps and limitations. So not so bad,
So tell us a little bit about, I guess for the practitioners who are out there who weren't able to be here, and I know you've done an incredible functional forum before in 2017 on this sort of topic, but what are sort of the pillars of what needs to be in place in order to support patients with their health during a cancer process?
So as you know, my mission and my passion is to have collaborative relationships between oncology teams and functional medicine, naturopathic medicine clinicians, so that every patient has a plan for their health and not just a plan for their disease. And over 30 years I've been in practice, I've developed a framework and a system that I now call my Outsmart Cancer System. And that's really a multifaceted approach to making sure that the whole person is cared for. But the fundamental core is to tend to what we call the cancer terrain or the tumor microenvironment, which is this signaling environment in which you can either inhibit or support hosting cancer. So we don't want a biosystem that's going to be hosting cancer development, progression and proliferation and metastasis. We want a biosystem that inhibits and sends stop signals. So in our toolbox, we essentially have epigenetic materia medica ways to impact that biosystem and all the signaling. So you can essentially change the metabolism of tumor cells and slow it down and put the brakes on, which buys you time to do some of the investigations you need to do to really put an individualized, really targeted treatment plan together with the best of both worlds, with a high level of confidence that you're going to get a good result.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm interested in sort of what that looks like practically, and how do you create something that's comprehensive without making it being overwhelming for someone who's already probably in their head and thinking a lot about how they got here and why this means to me?
Well, I would say that my protocols are pretty overwhelming to a lot of patients because I don't want to mess around. I want to take action as soon as possible. And some patients who have very aggressive cancers, you need to be aggressive with what you're doing to match that. And so I put together the treatment plan that I think is the best for the patient. And then I have a nutrition coach in my practice who takes my plan and holds my patient's hand and helps them to implement that. And depending upon who that patient is, who they are, their resilience, their inner resources, their ability to get organized to do it, she walks them through it at whatever pace they feel capable of starting. So some people are quantum leapers and most of us are baby steppers, but you can stair step up into that. But at the first visit, I have a few goals. One is to decrease the anxiety that patients have, which is really amplified by the oncologist, and to give the patient a framework in which I encourage them to have not only their disease team, their oncology team, but a health team as well, but to really emphasize that they are the head of their own team. The oncologist doesn't own their body, their time, their schedule, or their decisions, so that the patient then has a sense of control, a sense of agency, a sense of impact of where their journey is going to take them. And that by itself is huge for the patient. And we can certainly start leveraging things in the diet right away and talking about sleep and things that don't cost a lot of money for patients who don't have a lot of money, so that right away way we can start putting a patient on a low glycemic diet so that that signaling, that growth signaling that comes from glucose and insulin can immediately be downgraded, and then we're slowing down the metabolism. So there's some simple things to start with, and then the patient feels like they're doing something for themselves, you know.
I sat next to a doctor who works with a lot of cancer patients at dinner the other night, and she was sharing how, you know, as she's gone further into doing this work, she's really focused more and more on the emotional side of things. And I'm just wondering, like, what are your recommendations for dealing with that? And obviously you have, you know, your background in Chinese medicine, so I'm sure that informs some of it. So what are some of the ideas that you would bring forward in that end?
Well, from the beginning, the patient wants to be seen as a whole person and deeply listened to, and that doesn't always happen in the oncology setting. That by itself is important, so we give that. I also encourage patients' support system to come to the visit or to be with them on a Zoom visit, and that's important too, so that the people that are helping and caring for the patient really feel that the message is clear. And, you know, patients retain about 10% of what the doctor says to them. So if they have family members or primary friends or family members, significant others with them, their kids, then it's really a team approach. Nobody can go through cancer by themselves, so having that support system is really important. Some cancer patients feel like they're supposed to go to bed and rest and don't understand that staying engaged in life and exercising and staying active in their life is part of their well-being. A lot of relationships change when you get diagnosed with cancer. So there's this psychosocial part of it. But then there's the spiritual and existential part of facing one's mortality. And I am quite comfortable talking to patients about end of life, mortality, death and dying. I'm comfortable. So if there's somebody in the room that's comfortable, that is helpful. But also my job is to help the patient build their team. So if they need psychosocial or spiritual support, if I can't, in my conversations, my intimate conversations with them, be that person, then it's my responsibility to make sure they have the right team for that part of their journey as well. Yeah.
So what does an optimized integrative oncology team look like?
Well, I want the patient, I'm like, what's the right tool for the job? And whatever universe that comes from. So for some patients, that might be surgery or chemotherapy or immunotherapy. Natural therapies don't have a powerful cytotoxic tumor burden reducing effect. And so sometimes if there's a lot of tumor burden or very aggressive cancer, we need those big guns. We need those therapies. So I want the plan always to be highly individualized. And standard of care oncology is not. So I may argue to the oncologist for more specialized tumor analysis to make sure that we have the right treatment for them. I also want it to be in the right timing for the patient. So the oncologist will often hurry them up, but cancer is not an emergency, it's not urgent care, it's a chronic syndrome. So I want the patient to be ready psychologically and energetically and just have their life organized to be able to do something hard and have a good outcome. So all those pieces, there has to be food therapies and dietary therapies in place for the unique nutritional needs of patients, make sure they don't lose muscle mass and lose weight and are able to digest their food. That has to be in place. I use a lot of nutraceuticals and botanicals with the intent to inhibit the metabolic aggression of the cancer, with the intent to turn on cancer suppressor genes and turn off cancer promoter genes, which we can do with plant medicine and food, and to just basic things. A lot of patients need help with sleep, healthy sleep cycles, and understanding, you know, they should keep exercising. Patients who have had surgery, often their bodies are deformed and they've lost a body part. A lot of patients feel very self-conscious about that. intimate and sexual relationships change for patients. And so there's a lot of things to talk about. So listening to the patient is very important to see what's most important to them and to speak to that. And then as I get to know the patient, as I read their pathology reports, do more labs on them, we keep fine-tuning it so it becomes more and more individualized. So if you have a patient who's a diabetic and a cancer patient, you have a patient who's an autoimmune patient and a cancer patient, you have a patient with a history of depression and they have cancer, the needs are different. And so you have to put that in the treatment plan. And so that's the beauty of doing individualized care.
Well, I know this has been your mission for a long time, and I know there's only one of you, but I know part of your mission is to train other people to do this, and you've got your Academy of Integrative Oncology. You know, now that you've been doing that a number of years, and actually a lot of people from our community, you know, took that course, how do you feel about the plan of educating others to sort of do the work that you've done, and who have you found to be the most receptive to that?
Well, you know, I have quite a range of clinicians that come into my Foundations of Integrative Oncology training course where I teach my Outsmart Cancer system. And I have nutritionists, I have acupuncturists, I have naturopaths, I have radiologists and medical oncologists. I have functional medicine docs that have primary care practice. And my course is very pragmatic, and so it's easy for the clinician to begin to implement. And then we do a live office hours call where the docs can present their cases and ask clinical questions, and that's really how I learned. I had a mentor, and that, you know, when you're struggling to figure out what the right treatment plan is for your patient. And the feedback has been wonderful. The course has been up almost 5 years now. And, you know, it's a long learning curve, really. But what's very interesting is most of the docs that come into my course have been in practice for 15 or 20 years. And so these are clinicians that feel the limits of their training, the skills they don't have, the knowledge base they don't have. And if you never specialized in oncology, you really don't have enough ground and depth and breadth to understand. How do you take a history of somebody who's received cancer treatment differently than you take a history of somebody who's coming in with fatigue from thyroid versus fatigue from cancer treatment? And so I put an emphasis on building that skill as well. But, you know, clinicians who have functional medicine, integrative medicine, naturopathic medicine practices have a framework for this. They just need that knowledge and skill base to be added, and these are the most dedicated clinicians. So it's a pretty highly engaged group, and it's very rewarding.
Well, thank you for your continued work and leadership. I know it's been a big moment to come here and lead in this conversation, and I wish you all the luck, and we're here in your corner, and see some exciting things in the future for taking this forward to more people. So thank you.
Thank you for your ongoing support and friendship, James.
All right, I am here at the annual international conference with Betty Murray. Betty, I know when we met first, you had a vision of a grand interdisciplinary clinic in Dallas. I'd love to get an update on what's going on.
Oh, so we do have a grand interdisciplinary group. So Living Well Dallas, we've been around for almost 19 years. And so now we have a 6,500 square foot facility. We have multiple practitioners. So we have internal medicine, psychiatry. We have hormone management, nutritionists, health coaches, counselors, the whole 9 yards.
Amazing. So obviously a lot of doctors come through the path of starting their own practice, but they have this dream. Like so many doctors I've met over the time have exactly this dream. What tips would you give them of the things that you've learned along the way that might help a practitioner who maybe is successful but looking to that next step and not wanting to make any mistakes?
You know, I think probably the most important first step is to not think so much about, let me bring all these disciplines together, all these different specialties together, is to start with a very fundamental, easy track. So let's say I'm an MD and I want to start bringing in additional support, start with a health coach, start with a nutritionist and a health coach, because the more complex you make that practice, i.e. specialties, the more the process in which you onboard patients, manage patients, and handle that ecosystem becomes very complex. And a lot of times practitioners come to me and they're like, I want all of that. I want to be another Mayo for functional medicine, but you want to cut your teeth on a really clear, narrow sort of support structure that allows you to really grow without having to add more hours. That's the other thing is when you bring in these support individuals like a health coach or a nutritionist, you're now multiplying your touch without multiplying your time. Right? So if they think that way, then once they have that process down, then it's, okay, if I want to add another specialty, now I have my process down, I have my plans, how it works, my protocols, then I can bring that other specialty in and I already have my paradigm set.
What's your tips for creating like a cohesive provider environment where there's no, where you try and avoid like competition and those kind of ideas in a cohesive team?
Right. So I know you talk about this all the time. It's a lot of it is the rising tide, raises all boats. So in even a practitioner environment where, I'm seeing this person, I want to keep them. The simple fact is we as a business, so if I put on my business hat at my clinic, my job is to make that experience for the practitioner an awesome experience. So as a business owner, and so we take the onerous, ugly things off of them, like all the administrative, all those other things. And the other part is to have collaborative care meetings, to have collaborative training, is to build that collaboration into the paradigm. Because then that takes away, oh, that's my patient, I want to keep them, even though they may be better served by another person. So I think as a business owner looking at it that way, my job is to make the experience for the patient amazing and the practitioner, and to build that cohesion.
Incredible advice. I know, having been in this for 18 years, I've heard that vision so often, so I just want to salute you for actually doing it, executing it, and now passing the wisdom back to the community.
There are many simultaneous revolutions happening in healthcare right now. There's a functional medicine revolution, there's a lifestyle medicine revolution, but there's also a psychedelic medicine revolution. And Dr. Scott Shannon is bridging the worlds of integrative medicine and psychedelics, and we sat down with him for a special interview just as he was keynoting this year's conference. Enjoy.
All right, we are super excited to have the closing keynote of this year's conference here with us, Dr. Scott Shannon. If you've been watching the Functional Forum for a long time, you know that years ago we did an interview talking about the practice model that Dr. Shannon had doing integrative psychiatry and integrative mental health. So, Doc, great to have you back after all these years. And I'd love to just get an idea of how the practice has evolved, since we last spoke.
Thanks, James. Happy to be here. I guess the way the practice has evolved is we've continued to do more ketamine work. We've wrapped up, for the most part, our MDMA phase 3 trial, and that's about to be submitted to the FDA. And fingers crossed, MDMA approval this time next year. We're just beginning a trial with LSD with MindMed. It's the first LSD trial in the US in 40 years. It's a phase 2B study. We're doing some group work with frontline healthcare personnel, first responders. Just found out today we were awarded a $98,000 grant to provide group-based ketamine services for these healthcare providers. And we've continued to grow. We've added a few more prescribers, and we're doing a lot of QEEG, brain maps, and that's what our breakout session is about tomorrow.
That's exciting. So I remember before you had naturopathic doctors, right, as well as psychiatrists, and then psychologists and health coaches. Is that right?
It's funny, we're just talking about adding in a health coach now, because I went to a segment on health coaching and I said, we need this to fill out what we're doing. So
I guess one of the things just on the psychedelic side, my feeling is the relevance of it to the average functional medicine practitioner is that, when you've had people who are maybe stubbornly not able to change, that kind of peak experience can be the thing that gets people, ready to jump in to do a new level of self-care. Is that something you found?
Yes, we definitely find that after psychedelic work and after ketamine work, that people are much more energized, they're neuroplastic, clear evidence that their neuroplasticity is enhanced, they're more able to learn, they're more energized and motivated. So I think one of the takeaways for functional medicine providers is if you have ketamine providers in your community, which they likely do, that if you've got someone who's stuck, consider referring them out for ketamine and then working collaboratively, health coaching, integrative work, while they're going through the ketamine work, because that's a window of change and a window of opportunity.
Do you think there's the right level of collaboration between the sort of greater lifestyle, functional, integrative medicine community and the MAPS community as an example? I mean, you're bridging those two, but who else is bridging those?
Yeah, I'm actually giving a talk in a couple weeks talking about psychedelic medicine, integrative medicine, that it's a necessary marriage. Because psychedelic medicine carries power, and it carries the ability to change chronic problems and the ability to tap into spiritual awareness and understanding. But it's not very good about prevention. It doesn't really have anything for dealing with mild problems. It doesn't address lifestyle issues. And I think these two are just a perfect complement for each other.
I'm so glad you said that, because I went to a conference, the Mexican Association of Lifestyle Medicine, last year and gave a talk. And as I was talking to them, I realized that in that community, and there's actually a couple of doctors here at this conference who were there, they were sort of saying, like, why is it so separate? It's obviously one and the same thing. It's on the sort of same spectrum of healing, and I'm glad that you're pioneering that into it. So for the most average functional medicine clinic, it's probably not, a great fit to be, they're not going to be in the spot to be doing those psychedelics. But you mentioned you've got some other things that you think are sort of more relevant. And what are some of your thoughts on how functional medicine can embrace some of the work that you have found value from in your clinic?
Well, we've been doing brain maps, which is quantitative electroencephalograms. Okay. And this is a 40-minute process that you can pretty quickly learn. You can send out the data sets to be analyzed and get a report back within a day. And that tells you how the networks and hubs within the brain are working, and it's very specific for diagnosis. For example, with ADHD, we have this one wastebasket diagnosis of ADHD, but with an electroencephalogram, we can see at least 6 different phenotypes that we would address differently. Some are going to respond well to stimulants, some are going to get anxious and stop sleeping and stop eating on stimulants. And so what I see coming out of the research is that this is the way that psychiatry is finally going to get connected to the brain.
It's really interesting, actually, because if you think about the Bredesen protocol or some of those things, that was sort of splitting one disease into a few different phenotypes and treating them differently. I think this is probably just good medicine across the chronic illnesses,
Personalized
right?
medicine.
Yeah.
I think it's time to get there. I mean, we need to move beyond the point where psychiatrists are giving personal opinions about what they think is wrong with people, because that's, it's just very well proven. It's not reliable, it's not consistent, it's not really very scientific.
One of the things I've seen here and met even at this conference is doctors that have sort of come to an event like this and been fully captivated in, and I'm sure your talk at this conference will do that for some people. What's your recommendation about sort of the easiest places to get started, to add in some of the other toolkit that you bring in to your average psychiatric practice?
Well, I would say there's the basic functional medicine piece about understanding inflammation in the brain and the gut-brain connection and diet, nutrition. To me, that's sort of the fundamental, that's the foundation. Yeah. And then from there, I think you can look at add-ons such as stepping into psychedelic medicine. Ketamine might be the entry point, preparing for MDMA's release, perhaps in the next year. We just, knock on wood, we just finished our phase 3 study and we'll submit to the FDA in the next few months. Yeah. So I think that ketamine work is a reasonable entry point if you want to start working in the whole area of psychedelic medicine, if you want to get into the sort of counseling side and the more spiritual medicine piece. I think it's very attractive and interesting, and certainly explosion of interest in it right now. On the other direction, I think if you want to do brain-based sort of biometric work, looking at QEEGs, looking at doing brain mapping in your office would be a way to begin to step into personalized medicine on the sort of neuropsychiatry side.
I'd love to get your take on, obviously the last 6 months, there's been this sort of whole new data coming out about whether or not serotonin, plays an important role, or is it the cause of depression, low serotonin. Obviously, there's drugs associated with that, but also some of the functional medicine, tools would talk about serotonin maximization. What's your take on all of that?
Serotonin's important, but really nobody in neuroscience at this point holds a serotonergic view of depression. It's just much more complicated than that. And one way to look at it is what's the difference between Prozac, fluoxetine, and psilocybin, magic mushrooms. So Prozac works on a 5-HT1A receptor, and what that does is it helps the body to manage stress better. It helps it to tolerate stress, okay? And it works on receptors outside the cell in a very narrow part of the brain. And then what psilocybin does is it works in 5-HT2A receptors, and it works to alter the responses, to change, not to adapt and tolerate distress, but to actually change and create new modes of addressing and dealing with difficult things. Yeah. Increases neuroplasticity. It works throughout the brain, and it works on receptors both outside the cell and inside the cell. So that's why our experience is that 1 or 2 sessions with psilocybin or LSD can create change that is measurable 3 and 6 months later. One experience. We're not talking about daily dosing.
How exciting is it that, coming into this sort of the peak of your career, I guess, that this is happening right now?
Well, it's funny. I started out in the 70s at the University of Arizona with Andrew Weil, and it's interesting is that his belief system was about psychedelic medicine and integrative medicine. He actually coined the term. But for him, those are 2 threads that have sort of defined his career. Yeah. And to see this, happening and to be sort of out in the fringe and the frontier for so long, it's nice to see this coming more mainstream. It's beautiful.
And Colorado is sort of the center of the universe in a weird way, right?
We are doing our first psilocybin session in the office tomorrow.
Wow. Legal. Wow. Well, look, I just want to share my appreciation for you for leading this. I mean, I think that, many people in our community are super excited to see this, this coming together. But what it actually takes is, I think, some profound respect to do it right, because there's obviously ways that this could go sideways as well. And you've seen how, good ideas implemented without heart and implemented without integrity, haven't lived up to their potential. And I think many of us hope that this can. And I just wanted to salute you for being in the trenches, doing it right, and now, educating this whole community about what it takes to do it right. And I'm very excited about the future with people like yourself at the helm.
Thanks, James. I really feel like one of the reasons why psychedelic medicine is such a sort of having such a cultural moment right now across science and politics, and you're just reading about it everywhere, is that there's really a spiritual vacuum that we're feeling in our society, and materialism and commercialism has pulled us from our center. And I think psychedelic medicine is a way to get back to our core, to ourself, to our soul.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I am Dr. Hadar Elbaz, and I am here. I just took a class from Dr. Mark Hyman, and it was fantastic. I exactly practice what he preaches as well, and that is longevity tips. And my longevity tips to you are: make sure you get your 8 hours of sleep every night. Make sure you exercise. Make sure you soak up the sunshine and vitamin D. Also go outside and soak yourself in the ocean for vitamin C. SEA. Make sure you get your hormesis activities such as cold therapy and heat therapy. Make sure you eat your antioxidants and broccoli for sulforaphanes. And make sure you laugh and practice gratitude every day and mindfulness as well. Make sure you heal any kind of hidden and deep-seated traumas, and make sure you have a beautiful day.
Hello, my name is Kirsten Carter. I'm an internal medicine MD, and I have 2 tips for today. One I learned here today, or actually this past couple of days at the IFM conference, which is that I practice in an indigent care setting, and we have a lot of patients without resources. And a lot of the companies that provide either GI mapping and testing, in addition to nutraceuticals, have patient assistance programs where you can contact them and they will help support them either for free or low-cost services. I did not realize that was available, and we're really excited to use that. Pro tip number 2 is, at our clinic, we utilize a lot of students, as this lovely woman right here. Emily is a biomedical engineering student, and we use a lot of pre-med, med, and other alternative medicine students who come and collaborate with us. They get great clinical exposure and learning, and we get to utilize their very smart brains to assist us in completing patient tasks, clinical coordination, and research. Thanks for letting me share.
All the way from the Philippines, I got Mitch here. Always good to see you at the annual conference. What's going on in the Philippines in functional medicine?
There's a lot going on, and we had our AFMCP in 2019, and we're hoping to have another AFMCP in 2024, so we're bracing up for that.
That's great. So, the doctors that get that initial training, what does their life and practice look like, and how are you supporting them in that journey?
There's a whole lot of collaboration going on there right now, James. There's a whole lot of doctors who've gotten their IFMCP already. I think we're one of the largest cohorts in Southeast Asia. Right now, my focus has been to be able to create more cohorts from the nursing sector, as well as in the health coaching and the nutritionist, dietitians groups.
Great. And do you see it spreading into other countries down in that area?
Absolutely. So we've been hounded by a lot of the other countries there to be able to bring more of the IFM conferences, as well as do some workshops. So we're currently collaborating with Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health to be able to do programs inside of their university, as well as in our Life Science Center.
All right. It's happening all over the world, Philippines, Southeast Asia. We're coming at you next. Functional medicine spreading. All right, always super grateful for Fullscript and their continued support of the evolution of medicine. On the Wednesday, we did our pre-party and we had our pickleball matches, and they super generously supported that. And then we actually caught up with Dr. Jeff Glad, who's their Chief Medical Officer, to talk about implementation, talk about what do you take from a conference like this and how do you actually make it happen and bring it into your practice. And it was a really, really interesting few minutes. Check it out. Doc, great to have you here. Great to be with you again. What's been your experience of the conference so far?
Well, I mean, the first thing was just to be here in person, right? To get out of virtual conferences and to be engaging. I find when I'm practicing and I'm in Indiana, I'm a bit on an island. I mean, I have a couple practitioners with me, but to be able to commune and hang out and see all these people and hug them and talk to them and have conversations, I mean, that's the most important part. But I mean, the content's been incredible, right? Covering a wide range of things from longevity and optimizing health, cancer care, the immune system and inflammation. I mean, it's just always good to hear these experts speak, and the content just continues to be incredible.
Like when you're sitting in the conference and you're processing all of this new information, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always challenging myself is how's this going to change how I practice on Monday, right? And it tends to be pretty overwhelming, right? You've got all these talks. How is that going to change what you're going to do? So I'm constantly trying to take notes. I have a hard time going back to those notes, but I'm always trying to figure out what am I going to change? And usually just pick one or two things on, is it a different ingredient? Is it a different dose? Or is it a completely different focus, right? The foundations are always the same. Diet, exercise, mindfulness, sleep, but some of those other treatment type focused interventions is what I'm challenged with, kind of turning that into actionable steps on Monday morning.
So what does it look like for you to implement the information from a conference like this practically?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really what brought me to Fullscript. I mean, to have a platform that allows me to, become the Monday morning quarterback, or any practitioner, quite frankly, to become the Monday morning quarterback when they get back to their practice. So right now, these days, I've got my Fullscript platform opened up during the talks. And as I'm listening to this, I'm changing my protocols on the fly. So again, a form of curcumin and a dose of curcumin that's more important for this condition. All right, go find that protocol, find the product that fits, put that in. And then I'm building these, some protocols from scratch based on new focuses and new information that I'm gathering. I'm taking that Monday, I'm sharing it with the pracs in my office, and I'm sharing it with my patients. So to me, it's the ultimate tool to help, prescribe and manage healthcare's best supplements, but it really is the best tool to turn all of this content into actions on Monday morning.
So one of the cool things about coming back to a conference like this is, doctors that were in a conventional job a few years ago are now running their own micro practice, or some who were running a micro practice a few years ago now have a bigger practice and a practitioner team. How does FullScript help with implementing, continuous high quality care across a whole practitioner team?
Yeah, so now the ability to basically have your practice as the FullScript account, you've got your practitioners in there, you've got your protocols shared, the patients now, if someone is out of town and they need to see the other practitioner in the practice, they've got access to that FullScript, what's been prescribed before, their treatment plans, those can be adjusted. So the ability basically to run now just your practice, in terms of managing those prescriptions and those treatment plans for patients has become so much easier in the FullScript environment.
So I know as part of the conference, you did a breakfast event for FullScript. What is the message that you wanted to share out to the community for those who attended and for those who couldn't make the event?
Yeah, so our message here is all about quality and the quality of the products that are in our catalog, right? We're seeing this growing move of patients going to get supplements out on their own, going to big online stores to buy them for cheap. And I really think, we're trying to help the practitioner, both themselves and the practitioner help their patients understand that when you recommend a treatment plan, you're expecting a level of clinical efficacy, and that's going to require a quality product. And so we're talking to them about, reading labels and what that means and how the FullScript platform is built to only have a catalog of high quality products that practitioners can filter if they prefer certain certifications or they've got to have allergens out. So it really is the best way to get your patients on the best products.
We are super grateful to FullScript for being a partner at the Functional Forum for more than 9 years. If you need help with implementation, you haven't got a FullScript account, go to goevomed.com/FullScript. So much value that's being added to practitioners and practices that are using the service. Check out the link below.
Thanks so much for being here for the Functional Forum. I hope you enjoy it and got a little flavor of what it's like to be at this conference. Next month, we are going to London for the Integrative and Personalized Medicine Congress. I'm super excited to see the expansion happening all over the world and excited to go back to England and see the momentum that's happening over there. Until next time, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.